Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Irish NFL show. In the house tonight, we've got Colin, Christina, and Brian. Hey, everybody. So, we had a big weekend of the big games, and we'll get to those in a minute. Just first of all, a shout out to our partners, Cassidy Travel. You can start pre registering for the next year of wonderful playoff games and round divisional games and all the rest of it, all the good stuff. Go check out Cassidy Travel and you can get their details on our podcast information and all our socials. So we have quite the games to talk about. There was some extraordinary stuff, really. So I suppose the first thing to say is we have a Super Bowl coming up in 2 weeks' time, and that's going to be between the Eagles and the Chiefs. And Mahomes did Mahomes things, and the Eagles romped to another win. But oh, sorry, and also I just wanted to say quickly, I know I wasn't there, but thanks to everyone who came out on Friday night to Captain America's. I gather it was a great evening, and you had lots to say, and there was lots of interaction and good evening there. So shout out to Captain America's and everybody who came to that. And also last Thursday night at our partner PointsBet in their Dublin office, thanks to Graham Ross and his team for putting all of that together. So lots of shout outs there and more of that stuff to come in the future as well. But let's start here with the NFC Championship game last night, the 49ers and the Eagles. It was a bit of a one-sided affair in the end, but in fairness, 49ers were kind of handicapping themselves for a lot of it here. They lost their QB and then they lost another QB. And well, you tell me how I can understand this, but it seemed like the Eagles destroyed them in the end. I actually switched it off into the third quarter because I was like, I think this is done. But maybe I'll go to you first, Brian, and give me your thoughts on this game and how it played out and what you made of it.
It's a bit of a strange one, bearing in mind the importance and the significance of an NFC Championship game. And I tried to think back today to when the last time I saw such a dominant affair. Look, there wasn't injuries in this particular one. The only one I could really remember quickly was the Panthers destroying the Cardinals that year, in which the Panthers went on to play the Collins Broncos. But yeah, there's a lot of storylines in this game, and it's not down to what actually happened in terms of the actions, more so around the injuries. Yeah, I said it last week on the show. I don't understand why teams keep deferring and wanting the ball the second half against the Eagles side that are so explosive and they go down the field almost immediately in every game this season and scoring touchdown. And no team seems to have learned. And I thought this weekend Kyle Shanahan would have had a strategic move to take the ball first and try to go down, put a score up, and put them in a position where they're chasing the game, as opposed to everybody seems to be continuously chasing the Eagles. It's happened time and time again this season. And on the opening drive, we saw an Eagles team that were not in a position to go down the field like we've seen throughout the course of the season. I thought the 49ers handled them very well. They put them in a fourth down position, but the aggressive nature of this Eagles team is they'll always go for it. And the play itself, me and Colin spoke about it last night, was an incomplete pass, but it was called as a fantastic catch, and it looked like a fantastic catch from Devontae Smith. But I haven't seen replays in which Kyle Shanahan came out after the game and said he didn't get to see. If he did, he would have challenged the play. The play was an incomplete pass, but obviously the Eagles rushed the line and got the play off and ultimately scored a touchdown. In that instance, and again, I'm probably nitpicking because I think the reality is this game was never going to change. The Eagles were always going to win. But in that instance, I thought Kyle Shanahan could have called a timeout, at least to give his guys upstairs an opportunity to really look at it. And then he can, if he needs to be, call the challenge, and then he can essentially win his timeout back and win his challenge back if he's deemed successful. He said after the game if he had it back he would have called it. But ultimately the biggest talking point of the game was actually on the next drive, because whilst they were 7-0 down, the Niners started to drive off quite well and they were moving the ball methodically. And then Hassan Reddick, who's been a fantastic player from this season, got to the quarterback, and ultimately that was where the game unfortunately was very much over. We might as well be honest, like they brought Josh Johnson in, and I think he's had something in the region of 13 teams in the league. He's never really established himself as a starter, and the Niners, even today, even the players said that the playbook was completely downsized to what he was capable of doing. So essentially, you're playing with a hamstring quarterback, and inevitably from there. Now, in fairness, they got back 7-0, and then the next drive, and I'm not going to put it on referees, but what we've seen in the first 2 weeks of the playoffs is referees that are not willing to call plays. And we'll probably reflect on this in the next game as well. But what tends to happen in the season, the regular season, the referees are kind of overzealous and they do show a lot of flags. But come playoff time, that seems to go away. They don't show as many flags. And we've seen very aggressive play by defence in the wildcard round, divisional round, and there seemed to be kind of a nature this was going to continue into the championship games, and it did materialise because on that drive, the Niners were called for 3 players on a 70-yard drive, and they just kept shooting themselves in the foot when it looked like they were going to get the Eagles off the field, and it was 7-all at that stage. Obviously, it didn't happen, didn't materialise. Eagles went in, touchdown, next drive, fumble, but the quarterback recovered by the Eagles, touchdown right on halftime. I think that's where it ends. I don't think there's a lot to be said about the second half, with the exception of McCaffrey trying to play quarterback, trick plays, anything they could do to try to get themselves back in the game. But the game, I think everybody by now knew the game was over at halftime.
Yeah, myself included. That's why I turned it off. Okay, how about you, Christina? What was your take? Anything else that sort of stood out to you?
I think what we've really seen was that, Kyle Shanahan has become really good at calling plays, but so much so to the detriment of his quarterbacks. Does the 49ers actually have a quarterback curse? This is going to be the question we're going to see as we go into next year for sure. I did notice that Johnson has a bigger CV than what I have, so I don't feel so bad about my job hopping. My LinkedIn is safe. I was so happy about that. But what's interesting as well is, the domination of what the Eagles had last night. They just dominated. Their defense just tore that offense apart. The offense that we were saying were bullies the whole way through, the ones that Colin was saying were bullies the whole way through the season. And I know Colin was actually called that the Eagles would make it to Super Bowl. So he's been reminding us all of this all day, today. But, it's just one of those things. Look at, they're going towards the Super Bowl now for their 4th time in history. The last time they played was actually against my team in 2017. I'm still not over that for sure. But I think it all goes to see what's going to happen with the 49ers next year. Their offense up until last night was amazing the whole way through the season. And you could see how the play calls were protective of Brock Purdy, but you could see the Eagles defense was a lot older. They were longer in the tooth. They realized his weaknesses and they jumped on him last night.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe there's a little curse in there for the 49ers for stealing my little Christian McCaffrey from us. Okay, very good. And Colin, what about your thoughts on it? So you called the Eagles to be in the Super Bowl, I'm hearing. So what did you make of it?
Yeah, can we just do a quick flashback? The Eagles in the Super Bowl. I have the Eagles. There's the boldest of bold predictions. Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts are headed to Arizona. You'll notice that my colleague Brian chuckled heartily at my prediction that the Eagles would be Arizona bound, but they are Arizona bound, having been the best team in the NFC all season long. Look, the game was ruined because of what happened with the 49ers QB. Brian and Christina have talked about that. But ultimately, this is about the domination that the Eagles show in the trenches. We saw it yesterday. Nick Bosa initially, I think, really wanted to test Lane Johnson, and he tried it, and he did kind of a bull rush, and he drove him back. But that was it. Lane Johnson really stood up to it all game long after that. And you would have to say that, in terms of where my Broncos are at, since the Broncos last won the Super Bowl, the Eagles have won a Super Bowl, fired a head coach, changed quarterbacks, hired a new head coach, and are back at a Super Bowl again. It's a testament to Howie Roseman and what a great job he has done there. And I really think that we will be in for a fantastic and fascinating matchup in Arizona in just under 2 weeks' time.
We surely will. Am I right in thinking that time the Eagles won, was that the Nick Foles one where they had that crazy play where they scored? Oh yeah, that was the last truly incredible Super Bowl from my perspective. Now, obviously, as a layperson, I thought a lot of the other ones were a little bit dull or low scoring, but
I think it's the only Super Bowl call I've ever cheered the Patriots on.
Well, you wouldn't be cheering the Eagles as a Giants fan, I suppose.
Absolutely not. The red and white buntings would be going up all day outside the house.
Well, I'm sure Rob McElhenney, who's a Philadelphia Eagles fan and a Wrexham owner, probably had a great old weekend, considering they nearly went through in the FA Cup as well.
Yeah.
All right. Just a reminder to folks: throw in your comments there if you're watching along with us. We'd love to hear anything you have to say. Who's going to win the Super Bowl, I guess, is one of the big questions. So it might be time for us then to turn then to the other game, really, which is the AFC Championship game between the Bengals and the Chiefs. And I suppose even just as someone watching it from afar, like the thing that everybody was talking about was Mahomes' ankle injury. But it seemed to, well, I don't know, you tell me if it made a difference or not, but it was very, very close, this one, and it was all down to a field goal in the end, and mighty close to the end of things as well. But very exciting, and I, for one, as a neutral, always love to see Mahomes playing, so I'll be excited to see him in the Super Bowl. But tell me, maybe I'll go to you first, Christina. Tell me about this one and how you saw it playing out and what you took from it.
You know what? It was a really slow start for two offenses who were just highly charged, dominant, and just ready to go. They really and truly were. And you just touched on Mahomes and his ankle injury there. You know what? We all were questioning what type of Mahomes was going to come back and whether he's going to be comfortable or not. We seen him in the warm-up and he looked so flexible. I wanted whatever he was taking just for my standard aches of getting out of bed on a Monday morning. But there was a few moments that he did look like he actually was in discomfort, especially when he was coming out of the pocket. And you could see that the team was actually, the O-line was actually running with him around the pocket to be able to keep him guarded, to avoid any sacks, just to keep him comfortable as he was going through. Overall, the game I thought was very, very good. You could really see it was quite close. There was a lot of, we're going to touch on this, I'm sure, again next season, and we've touched it the whole way through the season. And Brian just went on and touched about it a while ago. It's the actual reffing itself, the officials themselves, the delays in the game because of the officiating in both games was quite, the officiating was quite poor in some retrospects as well. I'm sad for the Bengals. I really and truly am. I can't get past the fact that I actually wanted them to win, even though I had the Chiefs by 3. So I was happy last night on my bet. But look at Mahomes has done another amazing year with Andy Reid, and Andy Reid again is in the Super Bowl with Mahomes. You know, it's you can't see past Mahomes for MVP. You really can't. And Jalen Hurts for number 2, second MVP. Maybe we should just split the award because I'm kind of in between the two of them for sure.
Yeah, very good. And I would like to talk about that reffing thing, because actually one of the things that baffles me a lot of the time when I watch American football is the sort of the minutiae of some of the rules and some of the absolute complexity of what constitutes foul play and not. So let's definitely pick that up on another show. But for now, I'll remain neutral on it and say looks fine to me. Okay, well then, how about Brian? You tell us your take on the game. Close game, good game. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I thought it wasn't the game which everybody expected. I think everybody was expecting a high-scoring game. But bearing in mind, Mahomes is, I don't know whether it's a high ankle sprain or not, because I don't think you should be seeing quarterbacks running like he was running at the end with high ankle sprains. But he's playing, obviously he's carrying some kind of injury that affects him to a certain extent last night. But I thought the more kind of impressive manner for the Chiefs, I would imagine, was Chris Jones, on the front 7. He was literally in the first half in particular. He was unstoppable, and there was question marks going into the game, and we spoke about it at our show on Friday night and including Thursday's show around whether this offensive line for the Bengals would be able to stand up and go against this explosive on their day. Like, they're a bit inconsistent at times, but when they get going, and in particular in Arrowhead, in games like the playoffs, the defense it tends to show up, and Chris Jones in particular showed up. And once you look at his numbers this morning, it was 4 tackles, 2 sacks. It doesn't really tell a true reflection of how well he played, and he was so dominant that they were getting to a stage where they were having to double team him, and it was allowing for other players to come in and get sacks on Burrow. And in fairness to Burrow, he struggled in the first half, but you never had any doubts that he wouldn't come back, strong in the second half. And I felt going in at half time that I thought the Bengals might win at half time. I picked the Chiefs. I thought the Chiefs would win, but it was more the nature of the way the first half played out. I felt the Chiefs had kind of left them hanging around, and to a certain extent, which maybe that's a bit disservice on a really good Bengals team. But there was opportunities for the Chiefs in the first half to put away a little bit more. And even in the second half, I felt they were going to put away if it wasn't for Mahomes' fumble, which was kind of unusual to see. It wasn't like your run-of-the-mill fumble from a quarterback. He looked like he was about to throw the ball, and he just lost complete control, and allowed them to come downfield and get back in the game. And like the Bengals were into the end, and unfortunately today it is this talking points are about the refereeing, but I've looked back at them today, and some of them, I know Colin always, there's people out there have made points. I don't think whether it be this particular game, but there has been points made in the past that Chiefs tend to get the rubber agreement decisions at home. But you look at some of them today and look back at in terms of how it played out at the time. Some of them were justified in how they were called, and people are obviously not going to agree with that. But like the one at the end, people are again today are getting a bit agitated by the fact that Mahomes is going out of bounds and he gets pushed over, and they give the additional 15 yards to get into field goal range to win the game. It's a flag. Anytime in the season you're hitting a player out of bounds when he's 2 feet out of bounds, they're going to call a flag. The referees are always going to call a flag. If the referee doesn't call a flag, he's going to be up in front of the NFL asked why he didn't call it. So it was an unfortunate situation, and that particular player obviously was very upset after the game, and he was emotional, and there was a lot of players that were quite emotional going into the dressing room judging by the coverage. But I mean, Zach Taylor, I get into my rants. Here we go. I had this when we talked about the Jets-Patriots game. There's 30-odd seconds to go, you're punting the ball. He's a head coach in this league who has quite a bit of experience now. Surely he should be saying to his punter, bearing in mind Mahomes on the other side, whatever you do, don't hit the ball down the field. And certainly don't put the ball in a position where you're putting it into the guy's hands to return it. And he returns with 29 yards. Put the ball out of bounds. And then what you're going to do is you're going to leave them with difficult playing field to get down for a field goal, less time, and needing more players to get in position to kick a field goal. They didn't do that. They kicked it straight down the field, allowing them to return 29 yards. That was the play of the game. But it played the game for two reasons. One, the bad punt, and one, the fantastic return. But they should never put themselves in that position. They should have put it out of bounds. And I don't believe they would have been in a situation losing that game. I think they would have at least gone into overtime, and who knows. But that was a shocking decision to punt that ball in the middle of the field.
That cost them the game, ultimately. Yeah, fair enough. Colin, what about you? What did you make of the game?
I think you saw the two best teams in the AFC go head to head, and I think what we saw was a lot of what we expected, right? The Chiefs come out and they are amazing off script, right? So for most of our viewers may be familiar, but for anyone who isn't, your initial maybe 15 up to 20 plays are all generally scripted, and that's what you're working off. And the Chiefs are really good around that. They bring out a lot of different concepts, and what they're essentially looking to do, Calla, is test the defense. They want to see what looks you're trying to give them, what way you're going to respond. If we do X, how do you respond? That's going to tell us again later on if we plan to do X, maybe you're going to respond in the same way. So there are lots and lots of different things that they look to do. And early on, they had a huge amount of success, particularly, and Brian has talked about it, the dominance of Chris Jones. But as the game went on, the Bengals came more and more into it, and they responded. But I think the difference for me was there was a response to the response. So up to this point in the games that the Chiefs and the Bengals have played in the Burrow Mahomes era, the Chiefs have generally gotten out to a lead. Sometimes it's been really early on, sometimes it's come in the third quarter, but they generally get out to a decent lead, and all of a sudden the Bengals reel them back in. And obviously we saw aspects of that, but then there was a response from the Chiefs defense, and they took it up to another level again. And there will be a lot of talk about refereeing decisions, but ultimately, to me, the kind of most egregious one is redoing third down. I thought that was probably the biggest decision. I think the rest of them, you can make a fair case. And in the same way, we kind of expect referees to be perfect without expecting the same from players or coaches, right? So Mahomes fumbles the ball, he makes a mistake. We all know how good Pat Mahomes is, right? He's the best quarterback in the league, and he still makes mistakes. So Lionel Messi still makes mistakes. Pick whoever you want, and they still make mistakes. Referees are going to. The issue is in close games like this, that's where it really becomes a factor, and sometimes the lack of transparency, and I know Sam Monson was talking about this on PFF, and I think he's right. The lack of transparency is sometimes the issue, and this is I think where football in North America and football on this side of the Atlantic has real issues around transparency, and sometimes they make it so difficult that then it is easy for fans to call rigged rather than incompetence, right? I think that's what it was. They got it wrong, and the league refuses to ever acknowledge that they got it wrong or own up to an error, and that's where a lot of the issues come in. I think you saw a real rivalry. I think this is a rivalry that will continue for a long time. It had an edge to it, and certainly in the comments afterwards, you heard a lot of that. But it didn't have maybe the outright aggression that you saw in the Eagles 49ers game. I'm thinking in that you saw obviously Trent Williams do a suplex. You also saw similar where Jalen Hurts was deliberately hit late on, and the 49ers safety had a Ronaldo-esque smirk on him as he almost winked at his teammates. He was enjoying it. This, I think, was two teams who, because that was the 49ers were done at that point. They were kind of it was just frustration. Whereas with the Chiefs and the Bengals, it was the sense of trying to get a one-man upship. I feel for the young guy who ultimately it was his penalty. It was a penalty, and he knew it. But I will say I thought Hill did a fantastic job. I don't know, people may not have seen the video, but afterwards in the locker room, his teammates stood beside him, offering not only support, but basically kind of acting as his kind of agent / PR guy, batting away questions that he didn't feel were appropriate for a guy who's only 22, who dealt with a serious injury in his rookie year, and has come in and done really, really well. And that's kind of is a testament, I suppose, to the Bengals team spirit as well. But ultimately, Chris Jones and Frank Clark took over. The difference to me was the offensive line. And that's where it's going to be really, really interesting in a couple of weeks to see how the Chiefs O-line, which has been so strong, which did a great job again last night at protecting Mahomes, does against an Eagles D-line. But I think that was the AFC championship game was a real game. Unfortunately, injuries meant that we didn't get that on the NFC side. I hope in the Super Bowl injuries won't be the thing that we're talking about. I hope refereeing decisions aren't the thing that we are talking about, and I hope it's the football, the quality of the football, and the quality of the quarterback play as well.
Yeah, let's hope so. Christina, I saw you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, Calla, just as Colin alluded there, last night across Twitter, it was really prominent to see loads of people saying that, the league was literally handing Super Bowl and the win to the Chiefs. And that was actually because that was the play call that came from the New York official office. It wasn't even the refs on the sideline that made this decision in regards to replaying that third down. It was actually the league's office. And I do think that, while we give the referee stick, it does come from HQ, like Colin has said. And that's where we need to go into a new year where I think there's a lot more spotlight on the league. They're never going to admit that they're wrong. They're never going to admit that they take sides. You can see that in how they actually carry themselves. But I do think that next year there needs to be stronger officiating, and actually, the refs on the sideline also not being afraid to actually go against what the office is saying, because I do think that there's times in it where they are afraid and they just carry on. And exactly like last night, we could have had a really good game go into overtime and not end on that kick, who was an Irish kicker, by the way. But, it is just one of the ways of going.
Yeah, fair enough. Everything's a conspiracy until your team has the thing going for them as well, right? Brian, did you want something to throw in there as well?
Yeah, that particular play with the 3rd and 9, which obviously was replayed, I think that got slightly, washed away today by the fact that the Bengals still got off the field. Defensively, still got off the field. They still stopped that drive. They still got the ball back in a position to win the game, and they're on a 2nd and 2 with just a minute and a half to go, and they go for 2 deep throws as opposed to running the ball. Again, you'd have to question the play calling there, because why not? Again, this is something we spoke about Friday night around play calling with other teams in the league, and ultimately it's cost one of the offensive coordinators his job this weekend when he's already got a new job, but however, he's still got shown the door. But I felt there was more to be gained by running the ball, taking time off the clock, and not giving the Chiefs any time left. But anyway, that's that. But no, just back to Colin's point around the Bengals guys in the dressing room. Like, there's one guy, Joseph Asaya, who is the guy that did the foul in the secondary. He had a fantastic game before that. I mean, some of his tackling before that was immense. And unfortunately for him now, that's all forgotten, because he's the one who inadvertently shoves Mahomes out of bounds and loses the 15 yards. But BJ Hill is the guy that was with him, as Colin touched on, and he has had a difficult career himself. He was let go by the Giants a couple of years ago. Everybody thought he was washed up, got an opportunity with the Bengals, and he's going to turn his career around again. But it just shows the measure of the team and it's difficult loss. You would expect him to come back even stronger next season.
Yeah, they might have indeed. Well, you were talking about going off script there. I'm going to go briefly off script here, because that's our games for today. But a gut thought right now, because I'm sure we'll talk about it at length. But who do you think is going to win this Super Bowl? This is 2 immense teams. You can't have a big, long-winded answer for me now. If you have to tell me who's going to win it, who's going to win it? I'm going to go to you first, Brian.
I think the Eagles will, in all likelihood, win. I may not pick them come the day of the game, because I have picked every game correctly in the playoffs so far. That's my only little thing I can crow about now, because Colin has the ultimate gold card now that he got the Eagles.
Your Seahawks 9 games thing is long gone.
Oh, that got mentioned on Friday night at the live show. No, but I got every game right in the playoffs.
Still milking that, are you?
Someone else milked it for me on Friday night. No, I would think, I genuinely think the Chiefs are a better team, even despite the season in which the Eagles have had. I think if you look at player for player, both sides of the ball, even despite what the Eagles have done to refresh the offense, I would think they have the better team. But I think Colin talks about the bully boy situation there recently with the Niners, and we saw a different card being played last night with essentially the bully boys being the Eagles. At times I find that the Chiefs, and Colin has touched on that, they rebounded last night. They responded to the call last night. We've seen in the past that they haven't, and ultimately they've lost tight games. Maybe they've got over that now and they can address it, and they're not going to be the boys who are bullied. Maybe they'll be the bully boys in 2 weeks. But I just have a sense that when it comes to the 3rd quarter, 4th quarter in this Super Bowl, the Eagles' defense, more so than their offense, will be what wins them the game and stand up and ultimately stop Mahomes. But look, there's still 2 weeks to go.
Defenses win championships, isn't that the whole thing? All right, Christina, what does your gut say? Who's gonna take home the big prize?
It's going to be the Eagles, and I can see Travis Kelce, and he's the Kelce brothers' mom, struggling just like the Manning's mom. She probably loves Travis more.
Well, okay, we'll take that for what it is. Thank you. And Colin, what about you? What does your gut say?
To me, Kala, it is the guys that I've been on since the start of the season. I just think they've done a fantastic job. There are so few holes there, and Brian has called it out. To me, it is it's the D-line. You're talking about, like, there are 4 guys with double-digit sacks, right, throughout the season. It's 70 sacks, second in NFL history. They've continued that streak. But backing them up, you have Fletcher Cox had another 7. Milton Williams had 4. They brought in Sue. So, like, even when they need to give their guys a rest, they can come in. Look, the Chiefs are brilliant. And Patrick Mahomes is absolutely phenomenal. And this should be a fantastic game. And Andy Reid going up against the Eagles. There are so many subplots to this to remember. But the other thing about it, and we'll talk more as we get there, is Jalen Hurts wasn't a factor yesterday at all. Okay, the 49ers defense is brilliant, and in DeBeco Ryans talked about it previously. I think they have one of the best defensive coordinators around. they did everything right against Jalen Hurts. They put so much time and effort into it. They were really disciplined in their rushes. They ensured that they didn't allow him to escape the pocket. They took away most of his options in terms of throwing it. It didn't matter. The Eagles were still able to run the ball. So you can try and take things away, and a lot of the time when you take an aspect like that away, you're almost certain to win. But the Eagles have built such an array of talent that they can beat you in so many different ways. But look, Steve Spagnuolo is going to come up with ideas as well, and that's what is going to make this so fascinating. Mahomes gets an extra 2 weeks to heal up that injured ankle, and he is capable, as we've seen time and time again, of putting the team on his back and winning games single-handedly.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. But you're all saying Eagles. Interesting. See if you're still saying Eagles in 2 weeks' time. Brian, did you have something else you wanted to throw in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say this is the Chiefs' third Super Bowl in 4 years, and I'd have to run through the list of Eagles players that have played in the Super Bowl previously. There's a lot to be said for having been down this road before. They've tasted victory and they've also lost the Super Bowl, so they'll be keen to get the Lombardi back. There's a lot. Maybe the experience of being there before could be a decisive factor on the day. That's something else that will play into the game as from a mental standpoint leading up to the game.
Yeah, for sure. When you have Patrick Mahomes, anything can happen. I'm going to back the Chiefs anyway, but who cares? Okay, well that's our lot for this evening.
We have had just a couple of kind of questions or comments come in, Calla. So just maybe
fire them up there
to highlight that, because one of the things, I suppose, we are in the coaching hiring cycle, and there's been a lot of talk, I suppose, around Vic Fangio, and a report that initially came out that said he was definitely going to the Dolphins, and it seemed to be signed, sealed, delivered. And then Mike Silver came out, and there's a guy we've spoken to on the show previously, and he said he had called up Vic Fangio and nothing had yet been agreed. And I wonder if some of that isn't the fact that Vic has a very close relationship with the Shanahans, a lot of respect between Kyle Shanahan and Vic Fangio. He knows that DeMeco Ryans is very likely getting that Texans job. It looks like that's all but signed, sealed, and delivered. The second meeting, I think, rather even than interview, is due to take place tomorrow. Contract could be signed Wednesday or Thursday. So the 49ers will have an opening at DC. That is one to keep an eye on, because obviously there's a huge amount of talent there. Plus you have Kyle Shanahan. The question, and it came up repeatedly on Thursday night and on Friday night, is what will the 49ers do at quarterback next year?
Indeed. Any other questions you want to fire up there as well, or is that that's the biggest one we want to tackle right now?
The other one that came up is in relation, I suppose, to, and Brian touched on this, in relation to Kellen Moore, and I'm interested in hearing Brian's thoughts on this, in terms of he's got opinions on the Cowboys, he's got opinions on the Chargers. What does he think about this move?
So just for enlightening you, Callis, so we were during the show on Friday night, there was a very good, rich engagement period for about 10 minutes where back and forth between the audience and ourselves, we got into the Cowboys, and the predominant question was, why hasn't Mike McCarthy not been fired after losing last weekend? And what I felt was rightly called out was he wasn't the issue. In fact, Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator, was the issue, and I was calling out specific scenarios during the season where the Cowboys fans should have been frustrated by what happened, but unfortunately they seem to all put the blame on the head coach. Jerry Jones hasn't fired McCarthy, and obviously since then Kellen Moore has been fired, but Kellen Moore has quickly picked up a job in LA with the Chargers, and only a couple of weeks ago I was saying that the head coach of the Chargers, Brandon Staley, should have been shown the door, and he wasn't, and I was consistently on this show questioning his theories on how the game should be run offensively throughout the course of the season, and lo and behold, he's going to be with Staley next year. So I can imagine you'll be listening to me bang the drum next season about the inconsistency of these two working together. I'm surprised he got picked up so quickly.
Only in professional sports can you get fired multi-million contracts and get picked up for another one. And like anyone else who gets fired from a job generally doesn't get a big high-paid job immediately afterwards. But that's pro sports.
It's like a revolving door. He walked out one and he went in the other.
Bizarre.
Calla, just on that, what is going to be really interesting around that, and this is something that has come up previously, one of the issues, I suppose, around the Chargers and what was going on there was Justin Herbert has this amazing arm talent. Like, he is blessed with one of the truly, truly great arms, but they weren't utilizing that. So the question, I think, is around, is that Herbert as a conservative QB, or is it conservative play calling? And something to bear in mind is Joe Lombardi was the offensive coordinator for the Lions with Matthew Stafford was there. And I heard this on the Athletics podcast. While he was there, Matthew Stafford, another QB blessed with incredible arm talent, was fourth from bottom in terms of depth of target, right? In Joe Lombardi's time. We saw similar, obviously, with Justin Herbert. All of a sudden, things that changed when they went to Darrell Bevel, we saw Matthew Stafford jump up in terms of where he went. He went to second in terms of depth of target. So that change away from Joe Lombardi can absolutely completely alter how a QB plays the game. That is something to keep an eye on now. Kellen Moore, I saw the stat because I was interested given what I'd heard about Matthew Stafford. Kellen Moore, over the past couple of years, his QBs in Dallas have averaged 7th in terms of depth of target. So he's a guy who likes his QBs to push the ball down the field. That, I think, is really something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, very interesting. All right. Any last comments we want to throw up here?
There's a question from Fred around whether backup QBs could get kind of bigger contracts, especially given, I suppose, the number of injuries that we have seen, and it is something that kind of came up a little bit. I think it will be fascinating to watch the next decade of what might happen in the league. And Brian has brought this up on the show previously in terms of you can't overpay for great, but you can frequently overpay for good. And that is the issue that teams are going to have to figure that out in terms of how you judge it. Because if you overpay for a QB, it totally hamstrings you in terms of what you can do and the guys that you had to let go. It's not only QBs, running backs, and I know Fred, obviously the Cowboys, that brings that into sharp focus. But we're now in a Super Bowl where obviously Jalen Hurts is on a rookie deal, second rounder, so he's making very little. And Patrick Mahomes, when you compare Patrick Mahomes' contract to some of the other contracts, and the fact that he was willing to sign a 10-year deal and the flexibility that affords a franchise, that's really interesting. A lot of talk now about whether Burrow could reset the market. But the thing is, like, if we're now going to see QB contracts where a QB is earning $60 million a year, and I think it was just announced while we have been on air on this that the cap is going to go up to about $250 million. So it is a significant jump, but at the same time, if your QB is eating up that much, it doesn't leave a lot, certainly for a backup. So it will be interesting to see if more teams, I suppose, in the next decade are more willing to move on from a QB who they feel isn't elite. That has been the thing. A lot of the time over the last little while, teams have been willing to just say, okay, this guy is good and it's probably better than us rolling the dice again. I think we might see teams more willing to roll the dice and bring in a young guy just because of the flexibility but that's tough too, because you can get it so wrong in terms of the QBs that you take in the draft, as my Broncos have frequently proven.
Yes, indeed. Well, there's plenty of stuff to talk about, and I know that there's going to be there's no game obviously this coming weekend, but I know you have content lined up for all kinds of stuff next week and the coming week, and then we'll be back to you'll be back to talk more about Super Bowl and all the rest of it. So I think for now we'll call it an evening after a pretty exciting, although sad sort of end to the 49ers season, but nevertheless a great battle there with in prospect between Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, and there's much more to be said on that. So thanks to Colm, thanks to Christina, thanks to Brian, thanks to everybody with your comments and your questions, always appreciated, and thanks everybody for listening and watching, and we will see you next time.